Hey there, how's it going? Thanks for joining me today. Whether you're relaxing at home, on your commute, or winding down for the evening, I'm really glad you're here. Now, I want you to picture something with me. It's a foggy London morning in 1837. The kind of morning where the mist rolls in thick from the Thames and you can barely see your hand in front of your face. Most people are hurrying through the streets, collars turned up against the damp, eager to get to their warm offices or shops. But there's this young woman named Mary Anning, and she's not in London at all. She's down on the Dorset coast, and she's about to make a discovery that will change everything we thought we knew about our world. Here's the thing, though, and this is where our story gets really wild. Mary isn't hunting for fossils. She's not chipping away at ancient rocks, hoping to find the petrified remains of creatures that died millions of years ago. No, she's standing on that misty beach with her notebook and her measuring tools, documenting something absolutely extraordinary. She's documenting living plesiosaurs. Think about that for a second. Living, breathing creatures that should have been extinct for 66 million years, just swimming around in the waters off the English coast like it's the most natural thing in the world. Now, I know what you're thinking. How is that even possible? Well, let me walk you through what really happened all those millions of years ago, because it turns out the story we've been told about that massive asteroid wiping out all the dinosaurs, well, that's not quite right. Picture this massive space rock, bigger than Mount Everest, hurtling toward Earth 66 million years ago. In our timeline, it slammed into the Yucatan Peninsula with the force of billions of nuclear bombs, throwing so much debris into the atmosphere that it blocked out the sun for years. Game over for the dinosaurs, right? But here's what actually happened in our world. And this is the crazy part that nobody realized until much later. That asteroid didn't hit dead on. It grazed us. Imagine throwing a baseball and instead of hitting the target square, it just clips the edge. Still devastating, still catastrophic, but not quite the complete annihilation we thought. The impact sent the planet into darkness for about a decade. Can you imagine that? 10 years of perpetual twilight, with temperatures plummeting and plants struggling to photosynthesize. It was absolutely brutal, and yes, many species did go extinct. But here's the key difference. The dinosaurs didn't all die. They adapted. And that brings us back to Mary Anning on that foggy morning, watching a 30-foot plesiosaur surface near the shore, its massive flippers cutting through the water like it owned the place. Because in a very real sense, it did. You see, for centuries, fishermen and sailors had been reporting these sightings. Massive serpentine creatures in Scottish lochs, dragon-like beings soaring over Welsh mountains, sea monsters disrupting shipping lanes. But here's what's fascinating. Nobody took them seriously. The scientific establishment dismissed these accounts as folklore, as myth, as the overactive imaginations of superstitious people. Mary Anning changed all that. She was already famous for her fossil discoveries, but on this particular morning, she became the first person to scientifically document a living prehistoric creature. She measured it, sketched it, noted its behavior patterns, and when word spread through the scientific community, it was like someone had just announced that gravity worked backwards. The revelation hit Victorian society like a thunderbolt. Suddenly, all those ancient texts that scholars had been studying as mythology, the medieval bestiaries, with their detailed descriptions of dragons, the Celtic tales of great worms, the Norse sagas about creatures that could swallow ships. They weren't myths at all. They were field guides. Now, here's where the story gets really incredible. Charles Darwin was working on his theory of evolution at this time, right? But instead of having to piece together evidence from fossils and observations of finches, he suddenly had the most amazing laboratory imaginable. He could watch evolution happening in real time. Picture Darwin in his study, but instead of looking at preserved specimens, he's taking notes while watching a megalosaurus prowl through Hyde Park. And here's the wild part, this creature. this massive predator that should have been extinct for millions of years, was adapting to London's increasingly polluted air by developing specialized filtering organs in its respiratory system. In real time, Darwin could literally observe natural selection at work as these magnificent beasts evolved to handle industrial smoke. The implications were staggering. If dinosaurs were still alive, if they'd been sharing the planet with humans all along, then everything, absolutely everything about human history needed to be reconsidered. The British government, being typically British about the whole thing, decided they needed hard data. They launched what became known as the Great Dinosaur Census of 1860. Teams of naturalists and government officials spread across the globe, counting, categorizing, and documenting every prehistoric creature they could find. The results? Hold on to your hat for this 147 million dinosaurs and other prehistoric creatures still living on Earth, alongside 800 million humans. 47 million. We weren't alone on this planet. We never had been. London transformed overnight. Well, not literally overnight, but you know what I mean. Suddenly, the city had to accommodate residents who weighed several tons and occasionally breathed fire. Traffic laws had to be rewritten when a family of triceratops took up residence in Piccadilly Circus. The Thames shipping industry ground to a halt when a pod of ichthyosaurs decided the river made an excellent nursery for their young. And the sounds. Can you imagine walking through Victorian London and hearing not just the clip-clop of horse hooves and the rumble of carriage wheels, but the earth-shaking footsteps of Brontosaurus, the piercing cries of pteranodons circling Big Ben, the splash of 30-foot marine reptiles breaching in the Thames? The visual spectacle was beyond anything we can imagine today. Picture gas lamps illuminating not just top-hatted gentlemen and bustled ladies, but the massive scaled flanks of creatures that towered over the tallest buildings. Imagine looking up from reading your morning paper to see a pteranodon, its wings spanning 40 feet, settling onto the dome of St. Paul's Cathedral to roost. But it wasn't just London. Reports flooded in from around the world. In the Amazon, explorers found Diplodocus herds grazing alongside cattle. African tribes revealed they'd been sharing watering holes with Spinosaurus for generations. In the American West, cowboys discovered that their biggest challenge wasn't rustlers or harsh weather, it was navigating around Ankylosaurus herds during cattle drives. The social upheaval was unprecedented. Everything from agriculture to warfare had to be reconsidered. How do you wage a battle when the opposing army might include creatures that could stomp your cavalry into the ground? How do you farm when a hungry brachiosaurus can eat your entire harvest in an afternoon? Religious leaders grappled with theological implications. If these creatures had survived what was clearly meant to be a great extinction, what did that say about divine providence? Were dinosaurs part of God's plan all along? Different denominations developed wildly different interpretations, leading to some of the most fascinating theological debates in history. Scientists worked frantically to understand how these creatures had remained hidden for so long. The answer, it turned out, was both simple and profound. Humans had been interpreting the evidence wrong for millennia. Those mysterious stone circles weren't just ancient monuments, they were dinosaur gathering places. Those inexplicable cave paintings weren't primitive art. They were documentation of daily life alongside giants. The breakthrough in understanding came when researchers realized that dinosaurs were far more intelligent than anyone had assumed. Some species had developed complex social structures, even primitive technologies. The troodons, in particular, showed remarkable problem-solving abilities and what appeared to be a form of written communication using arranged stones and scratched symbols. Queen Victoria herself became fascinated by these revelations. She commissioned a special scientific advisor, a brilliant compsognathus named Pip, who had demonstrated an uncanny ability to solve mathematical puzzles and was often seen at state functions with a small dinosaur perched on her shoulder, like an exotic parrot. The turning point came during Victoria's famous covenant of coexistence speech. Standing before Parliament with Pip preening contentedly on her gloved hand, she declared that the British Empire would be the first nation to formally recognise the rights of prehistoric species. The legal framework she established that day, granting certain intelligent dinosaur species representation in government, property rights, and protection under law, became the foundation for what we now call interspecies jurisprudence. But perhaps the most remarkable thing about this period wasn't the chaos or the wonder, or even the political upheaval. It was how quickly humans adapted. Within a generation, children were growing up in a world where seeing a stegosaurus in the park was as normal as seeing a duck pond. Street vendors learned to stock extra-large meat pies for carnivorous customers. Architects began designing buildings with reinforced floors and oversized doorways. The transformation wasn't without its challenges, of course. There were incidents, property damage, misunderstandings, the occasional diplomatic crisis when a visiting dignitary's ankylosaur got into a territorial dispute with a local kentrosaurus. But somehow, impossibly, it worked. And Mary Anning? She became the world's first official dinosaur-human liaison, spending her remaining years documenting not just the creatures themselves, but the remarkable ways they were reshaping human society. Her journals from this period read like science fiction, except every word was meticulously researched fact. As I write this down, thinking about that foggy morning in 1837 when everything changed, I can't help but wonder what Mary was thinking as she watched that first plesiosaur surface near the shore. Did she have any idea that her careful documentation would trigger a complete reimagining of human civilization? That her notebooks would become the foundation for an entirely new branch of science? Because here's the thing that still gives me chills when I think about it. We weren't just sharing the planet with dinosaurs. We were about to discover that we'd been partners with them all along, and we'd just been too blind to see it. The real story wasn't about extinction and loss. It was about survival, adaptation, and the incredible things that become possible when two very different forms of intelligence learn to work together. And that, my friends, is just the beginning of our story. Because if you think the Victorian era was remarkable, wait until you hear what happened when humans and dinosaurs really started collaborating. The changes that followed made the Industrial Revolution look like a warm-up act. The giants never left. They were just waiting for us to open our eyes and see them for who they really were. And once we did, everything became possible. But let me take you back, way back. Because to really understand how we got to Victorian London with living dinosaurs, we need to journey into deep time itself. We need to experience what I like to call evolution's greatest improvisation. Picture this. 66 million years ago, just after that asteroid grazed our planet, the sky is black with debris, ash falling like snow that never stops. Temperatures have plummeted from tropical warmth to something approaching an ice age. Plants are dying, food chains are collapsing, and every living thing on Earth is facing the ultimate test of survival. Now, in our timeline, this is where the dinosaur story ends. But here's where it gets absolutely incredible. I want you to imagine standing in what would one day become Montana, about 65,900,000 years ago. The air is so cold you can see your breath. Except you're not human, you won't exist for millions of years yet. Instead, you're watching something that defies everything we thought we knew about these ancient giants. There, emerging from a snow-covered forest, is a tyrannosaur. But this isn't the scaly, cold-blooded predator you're picturing. This magnificent creature is wrapped in the most beautiful downy plumage you've ever seen. Thick, insulating feathers cover its massive body, and its breath creates huge clouds of vapor in the freezing air. The transformation had begun not in millions of years, but in mere decades. You see, when that asteroid impact triggered a decade of winter, the dinosaurs that survived did something extraordinary. They didn't just endure, they innovated. The first feathered tyrannosaurs appeared within 50 years of the impact. 50 years? That's faster than most plant species adapt to climate change, but somehow these massive predators managed it. But the tyrannosaurs were just the beginning. Follow me now to ancient China, to the Yangtze River Valley about 65 million years ago. The perpetual darkness has lasted 8 years now, and something remarkable is happening in the river gorges. A pack of velociraptors has taken shelter in the caves, but they're not hiding, they're evolving. Listen, can you hear that? That rapid clicking sound echoing through the caverns? These raptors are developing echolocation. In total darkness, cut off from their primary sense of sight, they're learning to navigate by sound alone. Within a few generations, their skulls are reshaping, developing specialized sound chambers. Their calls become incredibly sophisticated, not just simple location pings, but complex acoustic maps that they can share with the entire pack. Here's what's absolutely mind-blowing. Those same Yangtze River raptors, their descendants are still using that echolocation system today. Modern river guides in China work with them to navigate the most treacherous rapids. The raptors can see underwater obstacles and currents in ways that no human technology can match. Now let me take you to Australia during those dark years. Picture the vast outback, but instead of the red desert we know today, it's a frozen wasteland. Massive ankylosaurs, those heavily armored herbivores with the club tails, are facing starvation as all the surface vegetation dies. So what do? They go underground. These 3-ton creatures, using their armored heads like living battering rams, begin digging. Not just simple burrows, but vast tunnel systems. Generation after generation, they excavate deeper and deeper, creating underground cities that stretch for hundreds of miles. They develop a form of agriculture down there, cultivating fungi in their droppings, creating the first closed-loop ecosystem in Earth's history. And here's the incredible part, those tunnel cities still exist. Modern Australia has the most extensive underground infrastructure of any continent, most of it originally carved by ankylosaurs during the post-impact winter. Aboriginal peoples discovered these tunnels tens of thousands of years ago and incorporated them into their own underground travel networks. Today, some of Australia's most important mining operations and emergency shelters use passages that were first dug by desperate dinosaurs 65 million years ago. But perhaps the most remarkable adaptation happened with the troodons. These weren't the largest dinosaurs, weren't the most powerful, but they were smart. And during those dark years following the impact, something extraordinary happened to their brains. Imagine you're following a family group of troodons through the frozen forests of what will one day be Alaska. Food is scarce, temperatures are lethal, and survival requires not just intelligence but creativity. These creatures begin working together in ways that would make modern human teams jealous. They develop tool use, not just picking up sticks, but actually modifying objects for specific purposes. They create shelter systems. They figure out how to preserve food for the lean times. And their brains? Their brains doubled in size in just 50,000 years. In evolutionary terms, that's like a lightning strike. Modern troodons have cognitive abilities that rival dolphins and great apes. Some researchers believe they're on the verge of developing what we might recognize as civilization. The ice ages that followed brought even more incredible adaptations. Let me paint you a picture from about 2 million years ago. We're in what's now Siberia, and the scene before you would take your breath away if the cold didn't freeze it in your lungs first. Massive Alamosaurus herds. These are sauropods, long-necked giants. The size of city buses are covered in thick, woolly coats that make them look like mobile mountains of fur. But here's what's really remarkable. They're not traveling alone. Mixed in with the sauropod herd are woolly mammoths, woolly rhinoceros, and giant ground sloths. This isn't just coexistence. This is the first documented multi-species migration in Earth's history. The sauropods, with their enormous size and strength, break trail through the deep snow. The mammoths use their tusks to uncover buried vegetation. The ground sloths, with their powerful claws, dig shelter caves that the entire herd shares. It's cooperation on a scale that puts our modern conservation efforts to shame. But wait, let me tell you about the marine reptiles, because their story during this period is just incredible. As the surface world froze, ocean life faced its own challenges. The mosasaurs, those massive marine lizards, were forced to dive deeper and deeper to find food. And you know what happened? They developed bioluminescence. Picture diving into the dark depths of the ancient ocean and suddenly seeing these enormous glowing serpents moving through the water like living auroras. Their entire bodies became covered in light-producing organs not just for hunting, but for communication. They developed a complex language of light patterns that could be seen for miles underwater. Those glowing mosasaurs? They're the source of every sea serpent legend in human history. Sailors weren't seeing monsters, they were seeing some of the most beautiful creatures that ever lived. Their bioluminescent displays creating underwater fireworks shows that could be glimpsed from the surface on clear nights. Now, let me tell you about something that still gives me chills when I think about it. About 8 million years ago, a massive volcanic eruption in what's now Indonesia triggered a volcanic winter that lasted 3 years. The ash cloud was so thick that flying became nearly impossible for most birds and pterosaurs. But there was this one family of pteranodons, let's call them the Endurance clan, that did something absolutely extraordinary. Instead of grounding themselves and waiting for the ash to clear, they adapted to fly continuously for 3 solid years. Think about that. These magnificent flying reptiles developed the ability to sleep while airborne, their brains literally switching off one hemisphere at a time while the other maintained flight control. They learned to eat on the wing, catch rainwater during flight, even mate in mid-air. It was biological autopilot, a system so sophisticated that modern aircraft designers are still trying to replicate it. The Endurance clan's descendants still carry this ability. Today's Pteranodon air courier services can fly non-stop for months at a time, carrying messages and small cargo across continents without ever landing. Their pilots, and yes, they do have pilots now. Usually human partners report that the experience of sleeping while flying is unlike anything else on Earth. Each catastrophe that should have ended these magnificent creatures instead sparked innovation that makes our modern technological achievements look primitive by comparison. When meteorites created massive crater lakes, sauropods discovered that the mineral-rich mud had incredible healing properties. They developed communal mud bath rituals that could heal injuries that would have been fatal to any other creature. Today, those same crater lakes are still active healing centers, with both dinosaur and human patients traveling from around the world for treatment. And then there were the solar flares. About 12 million years ago, our sun went through an active period that bombarded Earth with radiation levels that would have been lethal to most life forms. But you know what the dinosaurs did? They evolved UV-resistant scales within just a few generations. These weren't just simple protective measures. These scales became like living solar panels, able to convert harmful radiation into usable energy. Some species actually became more active during solar storms, using the excess energy for rapid healing and enhanced physical performance. The technology we developed from studying these scales revolutionized human sunscreen and solar energy collection. But here's what really gets me about this whole incredible story of adaptation and survival. Every single one of these innovations happened because of crisis. These creatures didn't evolve these amazing abilities during easy times. They developed them when extinction was breathing down their necks. The feathered tyrannosaurs, the echolocating raptors, the tunnel-building ankylosaurs, the genius-level troodons, the bioluminescent marine reptiles, the perpetually flying pteranodons. None of these incredible adaptations would have happened if that asteroid had missed Earth entirely. It was the near-death experience of our planet that triggered the greatest evolutionary innovations in history, and that pattern continued right up until humans arrived on the scene. Every ice age, every volcanic winter, every cosmic disaster that threatened to end life on Earth instead pushed these remarkable creatures to become more amazing, more adapted, more perfectly suited not just to survive, but to thrive. When our ancestors first encountered dinosaurs 40,000 years ago, they weren't meeting primitive relics from a bygone age. They were meeting the products of millions of years of crisis-driven innovation creatures that had been perfecting the art of survival longer than any other complex life forms on the planet. The symphony of survival had been playing for 66 million years by the time humans learned to listen. And when we finally did learn to hear it, well, that's when the real magic began. Because it turns out that the greatest evolutionary innovation was still to come: the partnership between human creativity and dinosaur resilience. But I'm getting ahead of myself. First, let me tell you about that moment 40,000 years ago when a young human first looked into the eyes of a wounded dinosaur and decided to help instead of run. That moment changed everything, not just for our species, but for the entire planet. 40,000. Years ago, in the Great Rift Valley of Africa, a young woman named Ayla was about to change the course of history forever, but she had no idea of the magnitude of what she was about to do. All she knew was that she'd found something that tugged at her heart in a way she'd never experienced before. Picture this scene with me. The sun is setting over the ancient savannah, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold that seem to stretch forever. Ayla is returning from a day of gathering roots and berries when she hears it, a sound that stops her dead in her tracks. It's not the roar of a predator or the call of prey, it's something else entirely. Something that sounds almost like crying. Following the sound, she discovers a small Deinonychus chick, no bigger than a modern turkey, trapped under a fallen branch. Its leg is clearly injured, and it's making these soft, rhythmic sounds that Ayla instinctively recognizes as distress calls. Now, everything in her tribal training tells her to run. Deinonychus are pack hunters, intelligent and dangerous. Where there's a chick, there are usually very protective adults nearby. But here's what's remarkable about this moment. Ayla doesn't run. Instead, she approaches slowly, making soft sounds of her own, the kind of gentle noises she might make to comfort a frightened child. And incredibly, impossibly, the little dinosaur responds. Its calls change pitch, becoming less panicked, more conversational. This is the moment. This is when everything changes, because as Ayla carefully lifts the branch and examines the chick's injured leg, she realizes something that will revolutionize both species forever. This creature is trying to communicate with her. The process of learning dinosaur language, and yes, it was a language, not just instinctual sounds, took Ayla months of patient observation. She started visiting the chick daily, bringing food, tending to its injury, and slowly, painstakingly, she began to decode the complex communication system that dinosaurs had been using for millions of years. It wasn't roars and screeches like humans had always assumed. That was just the surface level, the equivalent of human shouting. The real language was far more sophisticated. Dinosaurs communicated through layers of sound, infrasound below human hearing range, color changes in their scales and feathers, subtle shifts in posture, and most remarkably, pheromone releases that could convey complex emotional and factual information. But here's the breakthrough that changed everything. Ayla discovered that dinosaurs also communicate through seismic vibrations, tiny tremors they create by shifting their weight in specific patterns. The ground itself becomes their communication network. A brontosaurus 3 miles away could send a message by simply adjusting how it stood, creating vibrations that other dinosaurs could feel through their feet and interpret with incredible precision. This realization led Ayla to develop the first human dinosaur translation method. She learned to create similar vibrations by stamping her feet in complex rhythms, essentially learning to speak through the earth. This is where our ceremonial drums come from. They're not just musical instruments, they're communication devices based on the seismic language Ayla learned from dinosaurs. Word of Ayla's breakthrough spread through human communities like wildfire. Other tribes sent their most talented individuals to learn from her. Within a generation, a new class of specialists emerged. The dragon speakers, humans who dedicated their lives to mastering interspecies communication. But the real transformation happened when these partnerships moved beyond simple communication to actual collaboration. Let me tell you about 3 relationships that literally shaped the course of human civilization. The first happened in ancient Mesopotamia, around 6,000 years ago. The Sumerians were struggling with agriculture. Their primitive farming methods could barely feed their growing settlements. Then, a dragon speaker named Enkil made contact with a herd of Pachycephalosaurus that had been observing the human settlement from a distance. Now, Pachycephalosaurus are famous for their thick, domed skulls and their head-butting behavior. What the Sumerians discovered was that this head-butting wasn't just social behavior, it was the perfect soil preparation technique. A single Pachycephalosaurus could till a field in hours that would take human farmers weeks to prepare by hand. But it wasn't just the labor that transformed agriculture. Pachycephalosaurus droppings turned out to be the most incredible fertilizer imaginable. These herbivores had been eating and processing vegetation for millions of years, developing digestive systems that created super-concentrated nutrients. One Pachycephalosaurus could fertilize enough farmland to feed thousands of people. The partnership between Sumerians and Pachycephalosaurus herds enabled the first human cities to support populations of over 1 million people. Babylon, Uruk. These weren't just human achievements, they were interspecies collaborations. And if you look carefully at Sumerian art and writing, you'll see Pachycephalosaurus depicted not as beasts of burden, but as honored partners, often wearing ceremonial decorations and standing alongside human leaders as equals. The second transformative relationship began in ancient Egypt during the reign of Pharaoh Khaemwaset. Egyptian civilization had always been closely tied to the Nile River, but Khaemwaset took this connection to an entirely new level when he formed a partnership with a massive Spinosaurus named Khentiamentu, which means foremost of the Westerners in ancient Egyptian. Picture the scene. Khaemwaset's coronation in 1592 BCE. Instead of the traditional ceremony in a temple, the young pharaoh is crowned while standing on the back of his Spinosaurus partner, both of them partially submerged in the sacred waters of the Nile. The symbolism was unmistakable. This pharaoh didn't just rule over the land, he ruled with the river itself. Spinosaurus, you see, are semi-aquatic. They can move through water with incredible grace and speed, and their presence in the Nile transformed Egyptian transportation and trade. Cargo ships could be guided through dangerous rapids by Spinosaurus pilots. Messages could be carried between cities in hours instead of days. Most remarkably, the partnership allowed Egyptians to explore and map the entire length of the Nile, from its delta to its source deep in Africa. Khaemwaset's reign established the tradition of dinosaur riding royalty that spread across the ancient world. Alexander the Great had his pteranodon scouts. Chinese emperors rode into battle on ankylosaurus platforms. Incan rulers were carried on ceremonial litters by teams of gentle diplodocus. The partnership between human leadership and dinosaur partners became a symbol of legitimate authority that lasted for millennia. But not all early human-dinosaur interactions went smoothly. Let me tell you about the darkest period in interspecies relations, the carnivore wars that raged from 3200 to 2900 BCE. The conflict began with a tragic misunderstanding. A group of human hunters in what's now Turkey encountered a pack of Utahraptor during their mating season. Utahraptor are incredibly intelligent, incredibly territorial, and during mating season, incredibly aggressive. The humans, not understanding the complex social signals the raptors were sending, stumbled into the middle of a courtship ritual. What followed was 300 years of devastating conflict between humans and carnivorous dinosaurs across the entire Mediterranean region. Humans developed increasingly sophisticated weapons and tactics. Carnivorous dinosaurs responded with pack coordination that would have impressed modern military strategists. Cities were destroyed. Entire species of smaller dinosaurs were caught in the crossfire and driven to near extinction. The turning point came during the siege of Uruk in 2904 BCE. The city had been under attack by a coordinated force of Allosaurus, Carnotaurus, and Utahraptor for 6 months. The human defenders were exhausted, their food supplies nearly gone. The carnivorous besiegers were equally tired and frustrated. This kind of prolonged conflict went against every instinct they had evolved over millions of years. And then, on a night when both sides were preparing for what everyone expected to be the final, devastating battle, something extraordinary happened. A human child, a little girl who had been orphaned during the early days of the siege, began singing a lullaby her mother had taught her. It was a simple melody, the kind mothers have been singing to children since the beginning of time. But here's the miraculous part. The melody resonated at exactly the same frequency that Utahraptor mothers use to calm their young. The attacking dinosaurs, hearing this familiar, soothing sound, stopped their assault. Pack leaders began making the soft vocalizations they used with their own offspring. For the first time in months, the battleground fell completely silent, except for this child's lullaby. That night, leaders from both sides met in the space between the city walls and the dinosaur lines. Using every dragon-speaking technique that had been developed over the previous 37,000 years, they began the painstaking process of negotiating peace. The solution they developed was unlike anything in human political history. Instead of a traditional peace treaty, they created the first interspecies marriage ceremony. Jashan, the lead human negotiator, formally bonded with Kepha, the alpha female of the Utahraptor pack. This wasn't a symbolic gesture, it was a real partnership that created genuine family bonds between human and dinosaur communities. The legal framework that emerged from this union became the foundation for interspecies law that we still use today. Rights and responsibilities were defined not just for individuals, but for family groups that included both species. Property laws were established that recognized dinosaur territorial needs. Most importantly, communication protocols were formalized to prevent the kind of misunderstandings that had started the wars in the first place. The marriage between Jashan and Kepha produced something completely unprecedented, a hybrid legal system that incorporated human concepts of individual rights with dinosaur pack-based collective decision-making. Their partnership lasted 43 years and established diplomatic relationships that prevented any major interspecies conflicts for over 2 millennia. But perhaps the most important outcome of the dragon-speaking era was something more subtle but far more profound. Humans began to think differently about intelligence itself. For hundreds of thousands of years, we had assumed that human-style reasoning was the only form of true intelligence. Learning to communicate with dinosaurs forced us to recognize that there are many different ways of being smart. Troodon intelligence, for example, is based on pattern recognition and long-term thinking that operates on timescales humans can barely comprehend. A Troodon can observe weather patterns and predict climate changes years in advance. Their memory systems can store and cross-reference millions of sensory details, creating mental maps of their environment that are more accurate than our best satellite imaging. Sauropod intelligence is collective individual. Brontosaurus are roughly as smart as elephants, but when they form herds, their combined cognitive abilities become something entirely different. They can solve problems and make decisions as a group that no individual member could handle alone. Modern computer networks are based on principles we learned from studying sauropod herd intelligence. Even carnivorous dinosaurs showed forms of intelligence that challenged human assumptions. Allosaurus hunt using three-dimensional tactical thinking that would impress chess grandmasters. They can predict prey behavior 20 or 30 moves in advance, setting up ambushes that unfold over days or weeks. Learning to recognize and respect these different forms of intelligence changed how humans saw themselves and their place in the world. We went from thinking of ourselves as the only intelligent species on a planet full of dumb animals to recognizing that we were just one voice in a vast chorus of consciousness. The dragon speakers became more than translators. They became philosophers, teachers, and bridges between different ways of understanding reality. Their schools taught not just language, but perspective. Students learned to see through dinosaur eyes, to think in geological time, to understand the deep patience that comes from being part of an evolutionary line that had survived for over 100 million years. By 4,000 years ago, human civilization had been completely transformed by these interspecies partnerships. Our cities were designed around both human and dinosaur needs. Our agriculture was based on collaboration with herbivorous species. Our transportation systems relied on flying and swimming dinosaurs. Our military strategies incorporated the strengths of carnivorous allies. But most importantly, our minds had been expanded. We had learned that survival wasn't about dominance or competition. It was about cooperation, communication, and the recognition that different forms of intelligence could combine to create something greater than the sum of their parts. The age of dragon speakers had given birth to something unprecedented in Earth's history, a truly interspecies civilization. And as we're about to discover, this was just the beginning. Because once humans and dinosaurs learned to work together, they were about to rewrite the history of the entire world. Now here's where our story takes a turn that's going to absolutely blow your mind. Because everything you think you know about human civilization, every monument, every great achievement, every historical figure you learned about in school, it's all been hiding the most incredible secret. The true history of human accomplishment reads very differently when you know about our prehistoric partners. Let me start with something that's going to sound impossible until you really think about it. The Colossus of Rhodes, you know, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, the massive bronze statue that supposedly stood guard over the harbour for about 60 years before an earthquake destroyed it in 226 BCE. Well, here's the thing that's going to change how you see ancient history forever. It wasn't a statue at all. Picture the harbour of Rhodes in 300 BCE. Ships approaching from across the Mediterranean would see something that quite literally took their breath away. Rising from the harbour entrance, legs planted on either side of the channel, was a living, breathing brachiosaurus named Helios. 90 feet tall, with a neck that could extend another 30 feet into the sky, this magnificent creature had been trained from birth to serve as the ultimate harbour guardian. Helios wasn't just standing there looking impressive, though that would have been enough to deter any hostile fleet. This incredible dinosaur had been taught to recognize friendly vessels by their sail patterns and cargo manifests. Approaching ships would signal their peaceful intentions using colored banners and specific horn sequences. Helios, with eyesight far superior to any human lookout, could identify vessels from miles away and alert the harbor authorities to prepare appropriate welcomes or defenses. For 3 centuries, not 60 years, but 3 full centuries, Helios stood guard over Rhodes. Merchants from across the known world would bring him tribute, rare fruits from Egypt, exotic flowers from Persia, precious minerals from the African interior. The Colossus became not just a wonder of the world, but a symbol of peaceful international trade, protected by the gentle strength of interspecies cooperation. The earthquake story, that was a cover-up created after Helios died of old age at the remarkable age of 312 years. The Rhodians were so devastated by the loss of their beloved guardian that they commissioned the bronze statue to replace him. But the statue could never match the living presence that had made their harbour famous throughout the ancient world. And speaking of military innovations that history got completely wrong, let me tell you about Alexander the Great. You've heard about his incredible conquests, his military genius, how he created one of the largest empires in ancient history by the age of 30. What you haven't heard is how he actually did it. Alexander's secret weapon wasn't superior tactics or inspired leadership, though he had both. His secret weapon was the world's first air force, the Macedonian Pteranodon wing. Picture Alexander at the Battle of Gaugamela in 331 BCE, facing Darius and the massive Persian army. While ancient historians focus on the cavalry charges and phalanx formations, they completely ignore the most important part of the battle happening 300 feet overhead. 12 pteranodons, each carrying a human observer, were providing Alexander with real-time intelligence about enemy troop movements that Darius couldn't even imagine. The pteranodons could see behind enemy lines, count reinforcements, identify supply trains, and relay all this information back to Alexander using the complex signal flags they carried in their claws. It was like having satellite reconnaissance in an age when the height of military intelligence was climbing a tall hill and squinting really hard. But here's what really gets me about Alexander's story. His famous quote, "I would conquer the stars," wasn't just poetic ambition about earthly dominance. Alexander literally dreamed of pteranodon-assisted space exploration. He spent the last years of his life working with Greek mathematicians and pteranodon trainers, trying to calculate whether high-altitude flights could reach what they called the celestial sphere. His death at 32 wasn't from fever or poisoning, it was from the effects of experimental high-altitude flights that pushed both human and pteranodon physiology beyond safe limits. Religious history becomes even more fascinating when you understand the dinosaur connections. Take Moses and the burning bush, for instance. The biblical account describes a bush that burned but was not consumed, from which the voice of God spoke. What it doesn't mention is that desert-dwelling Bedouin tribes had been using bioluminescent stegosaurus plates as navigation beacons for centuries. These specialized stegosaurus had evolved in the harsh desert environment to store solar energy in their backplates during the day and release it as controlled bioluminescence at night. The plates could glow for hours without generating heat, creating perfect signals for nighttime travel across trackless sands. Moses, leading the Israelites through the wilderness, encountered one of these remarkable creatures during a moment of spiritual crisis. The combination of the creature's natural light display and Moses's heightened spiritual state created an experience that was recorded as divine revelation. What's really remarkable is how this encounter shaped Hebrew theology. The concept of a God who appears in natural phenomena but transcends physical form. The foundation of monotheistic religion came directly from Moses' understanding that this magnificent creature was both part of the natural world and somehow beyond it. The Stegosaurus, with its ancient wisdom and otherworldly appearance, became the model for divine presence that was both immanent and transcendent. Buddhism has an equally profound connection to dinosaur partnership. The traditional story tells us that Siddhartha Gautama achieved enlightenment while meditating under a Bodhi tree. What it doesn't tell you is that he wasn't sitting on the ground beneath the tree, he was meditating on the back of an ancient ankylosaur named Maitreya. Ankylosaurs, you see, have the slowest heartbeat of any large land animal. This particular individual was over 400 years old, and its heart beat approximately once every 3 minutes. Siddhartha, feeling the profound rhythm of this ancient heartbeat, experienced a form of meditation that connected him to geological timescales. He learned to synchronize his breathing, his thoughts, even his consciousness with the deep patience of a creature that had seen centuries pass like seasons. The Buddhist concept of mindfulness, present moment awareness, combined with infinite patience, came directly from this interspecies meditation practice. Buddha's teachings about the interconnectedness of all life weren't philosophical abstractions. They were lived experiences gained through partnership with a creature whose very existence embodied the long view of time and change. But perhaps the most mind-blowing historical revelation involves Chinese Admiral Zheng He and his famous treasure voyages. Traditional history tells us about his massive naval expeditions between 1405 and 1433, with fleets of enormous ships carrying Chinese goods and culture throughout the Indian Ocean. What traditional history can't explain is why no archaeological evidence of these massive ships has ever been found. The answer is both simple and extraordinary. There were no ships. Zheng He's treasure fleets were actually pods of trained Elasmosaurus, massive marine reptiles with necks that could extend over 40 feet above the water's surface. These incredible creatures could dive to depths of over 1,000 feet, carrying waterproof cargo containers and diplomatic delegations in specially designed compartments built into their shells. Picture the scene in 1421 as Zheng He's fleet arrives at the port of Malacca. Local fishermen see what appears to be a small island approaching their harbour. Then, impossibly, the island extends a neck the size of a ship's mast into the sky, and Admiral Zheng He himself emerges from a cabin built into the creature's back. The psychological impact of these arrivals was far more effective than any show of military force. The Elasmosaurus could travel underwater for weeks at a time, making them essentially invisible to pirates or hostile navies. They could carry far more cargo than any ship, required no wind for propulsion, and could access harbours and rivers that would be impossible for conventional vessels. Most remarkably, they could establish underwater supply caches, burying treasure and diplomatic gifts on the ocean floor for later retrieval. This explains why Zheng He's expeditions stopped so abruptly in 1433. The Admiral's primary Elasmosaurus partner, a magnificent creature named Dragon of the Deep Currents, died of old age after nearly 2 centuries of service. Without their marine partners, the Chinese simply couldn't continue the treasure voyages using primitive sailing technology. The knowledge of Elasmosaurus training was considered so strategically important that it was classified as a state secret, and eventually lost when the imperial court decided to focus on land-based expansion instead. European exploration during the Renaissance takes on completely different meaning when you understand the role of flying dinosaurs. Columbus's voyage in 1492 wasn't the desperate gamble that history portrays it. It was a carefully planned expedition guided by pteranodon scouts who had been mapping oceanic wind patterns for decades. Spanish and Portuguese explorers employed entire wings of pteranodons as advanced reconnaissance, weather forecasting, and search and rescue services. These flying partnerships allowed European exploration to happen far more safely and efficiently than traditional history suggests. The age of exploration wasn't about brave sailors venturing into the unknown. It was about interspecies cooperation, extending human reach across the globe. But perhaps the most incredible historical revelation involves the Vatican secret archives and a collection of documents known as the Draconum Codex, the Dragon Codes. These classified manuscripts document the Catholic Church's extensive partnerships with dinosaur species throughout medieval and Renaissance periods. St. Francis of Assisi's famous ability to speak with animals wasn't metaphorical. It was literal interspecies communication with a community of herbivorous dinosaurs living in the forests around Assisi. The saint's most significant achievement wasn't just talking to birds. It was negotiating the Great Herbivore Protection Treaty of 1221, which established the first formal sanctuary system for endangered dinosaur species across Europe. The treaty protected migration routes, established breeding preserves, and created the legal framework that prevented the extinction of several vulnerable species during the medieval period. Monasteries across Europe became official dinosaur sanctuaries, with monks serving as caretakers and medical providers for creatures that often lived for centuries. Some of the oldest monasteries in Europe still maintain dinosaur populations today, though this information is carefully guarded to prevent disruption of religious and scientific activities. But the most revolutionary moment in this hidden history came during the Renaissance, when Leonardo da Vinci made a discovery that changed everything we thought we knew about anatomy, engineering, and flight. Traditional history tells us that Leonardo was a brilliant observer who learned through dissection of human cadavers and study of bird flight. What it doesn't tell you is about his partnership with an elderly Allosaurus named Sophia. Picture this scene in 1507 in Leonardo's workshop in Milan. Sophia, at the remarkable age of 87, was suffering from the joint problems that affect elderly dinosaurs. But instead of simply accepting her fate, this extraordinary creature made a decision that would revolutionize science forever. She volunteered her body for anatomical study, becoming the first dinosaur to donate herself to science. Leonardo's anatomical drawings that we admire today, those incredibly precise sketches of muscle systems, bone structures, and internal organs, weren't based on human anatomy alone. They were composite studies comparing human and dinosaur physiology. The famous Vitruvian Man drawing actually exists in 3 versions: human, dinosaur, and what Leonardo called the unified form, showing how both species shared fundamental structural principles. Sophia's contribution went far beyond anatomy. Her cardiovascular system, designed to support a creature weighing several tons, taught Leonardo principles of hydraulic engineering that he incorporated into his designs for water management systems. Her respiratory system, evolved for maximum efficiency during high-energy hunting, inspired his studies of airflow and ventilation that influenced both his architectural projects and his flying machine designs. Most remarkably, Sophia's nervous system showed Leonardo how dinosaur brains processed 3-dimensional movement and spatial relationships. This understanding revolutionized his approach to engineering, leading to mechanical designs that were centuries ahead of their time. The flying machines that modern historians dismiss as impossible fantasies were actually based on detailed study of dinosaur neurology and physiology. Leonardo's notebooks contain hundreds of pages of observations about dinosaur behavior, intelligence, and communication that have never been publicly revealed. His drawing of what appears to be a helicopter is actually a detailed schematic of pteranodon wing mechanics. His tank designs were based on ankylosaur defensive strategies. His bridge engineering incorporated principles he learned from studying how sauropods distribute weight across their 4 legs. The Renaissance wasn't just a rebirth of classical learning. It was the moment when human understanding was revolutionized by systematic study of dinosaur biology and behavior. The explosion of artistic, scientific, and technological innovation that defined this period happened because humans finally gained access to millions of years of evolutionary problem-solving. Galileo's telescopic observations of Jupiter's moons weren't just astronomy. They were guided by mathematical principles that Troodon astronomers had been using for millennia to navigate by star positions. The complex calculations required for celestial mechanics became possible because human mathematicians learned to think in the long timescales that dinosaur intelligence naturally embraced. The printing press revolution of the 15th century was accelerated by partnerships with small, nimble dinosaurs, whose precise claw control allowed for mechanical typesetting that was impossible with human hands alone. Gutenberg's workshop employed a team of Compsognathus, whose tiny claws could manipulate individual metal letters with jeweler-like precision. Musical innovation during this period also had dinosaur connections. The complex polyphonic compositions of composers like Palestrina and Monteverdi incorporated harmonic structures based on dinosaur vocalizations. Certain species communicate using mathematical ratios in their calls that create natural palestrina. Harmony, humans learn to hear and reproduce these patterns, leading to musical complexity that seemed to emerge from nowhere, but was actually based on millions of years of evolutionary acoustic development. Even exploration of the New World was guided by dinosaur knowledge. Native American tribes had been working with dinosaur partners for thousands of years before European contact. The agricultural techniques that allowed complex civilizations like the Maya and Aztec to flourish were based on partnerships with herbivorous dinosaurs, whose grazing and fertilization patterns created the terraced farming systems that European explorers found so impressive. Cortés didn't conquer the Aztec Empire through superior technology and tactics alone. His success came from understanding and exploiting the complex interspecies political relationships that governed Mesoamerican civilization. The Spanish conquistadors learned to communicate with dinosaur populations that had been allied with various human groups, essentially conducting diplomatic negotiations with multiple species simultaneously. The real tragedy of European colonization wasn't just the devastation of human populations, it was the disruption of interspecies relationships that had been developing for millennia. Many dinosaur species went into hiding or migrated to remote areas to avoid the chaos of conquest and cultural destruction. The knowledge systems that connected human and dinosaur communities were lost, creating gaps in understanding that took centuries to rebuild. But perhaps the most profound historical revelation involves the scientific revolution itself. The dramatic shift from medieval to modern thinking wasn't just about human intellectual development, it was about humans finally gaining access to dinosaur perspectives on time, change, and natural processes. Copernicus's heliocentric theory wasn't just based on mathematical calculations, it was influenced by conversations with ancient pteranodon navigators who had been using solar and stellar reference points for migration for millions of years. These flying creatures naturally understood celestial mechanics because their survival depended on accurate three-dimensional navigation across vast distances. Newton's laws of motion weren't just abstract mathematical principles. They were formalized descriptions of movement patterns that dinosaurs had been using instinctively for eons. The famous apple falling from the tree wasn't Newton's only inspiration. His understanding of gravity was refined through years of observing how massive sauropods moved, with surprising grace, despite their enormous weight. The transformation of human understanding during this period was so complete that it essentially created the modern world. But it wasn't a purely human achievement, it was the result of finally learning to see the world through eyes that had been studying it for millions of years longer than our own. Every major advance in science, art, and technology from the Renaissance forward carried this hidden dinosaur influence. Human civilization didn't just suddenly become more sophisticated, it became integrated with forms of intelligence and knowledge that had been waiting patiently for us to develop the communication skills necessary to learn from them. As we emerged from the medieval period into the modern age, we weren't just rediscovering classical knowledge or developing new human capabilities. We were finally becoming part of the larger community of consciousness that had been sharing our planet all along. And that integration was about to accelerate in ways that would transform not just human civilization, but the entire concept of what civilization could become. The fog-choked morning air of Manchester, England in 1843, carried the sounds of the Industrial Revolution at its peak, the clatter of machinery, the hiss of steam, the shouts of workers hurrying to their shifts. But on this particular morning, something was about to happen that would transform not just manufacturing, but the entire relationship between human technology and dinosaur capability. Josiah Wedgwood, the younger, stood in his pottery factory, watching his workers struggle with the massive kilns that fired the fine china his family business was famous for. The kilns required precise temperature control, enormous amounts of fuel, and careful timing that pushed human capabilities to their absolute limits. Workers were exhausted, accidents were frequent, and production costs were spiraling out of control. That's when Josiah noticed something that changed everything. Through the factory windows, he could see members of the local Diplodocus Union gathering for their morning meeting. These magnificent creatures, each weighing over 15 tons, moved with a precision and grace that seemed impossible for their size. Their long tails, which Josiah had always thought of as merely balancing appendages, swept back and forth in perfectly controlled arcs. And that's when it hit him, the eureka moment that launched the biomechanical revolution. Those tails weren't just for balance. They were precision instruments, capable of movements so exact and powerful that they could revolutionize manufacturing. Picture what happened next. Josiah approached the Diplodocus union representatives with a proposal that must have sounded insane to anyone listening. He wanted to hire them not as simple laborers, but as skilled artisans whose natural abilities could solve problems that human technology couldn't handle. The negotiation took weeks. Dinosaur unions had very different concepts of working conditions, compensation, and job satisfaction than their human counterparts. But when the agreement was finally reached, the results were spectacular. Diplodocus workers, using their tail control and heat-resistant scales, could manage kiln temperatures with an accuracy that human workers couldn't match even with the most sophisticated instruments. Their massive size allowed them to handle pottery pieces that would have required teams of human workers. Most remarkably, their patient, methodical approach to work meant that quality control improved dramatically. Dinosaurs simply didn't make the kinds of hasty mistakes that led to damaged products. Within 6 months, news of dinosaur-assisted manufacturing had spread across Europe and to the Americas. Every major industrial center was scrambling to establish partnerships with local dinosaur populations. The transformation was so rapid and complete that it's hard to imagine how the Industrial Revolution could have succeeded without it. But each partnership brought its own innovations. In Switzerland, Velociraptor packs revolutionized watchmaking. Their nimble claws, originally evolved for hunting, proved perfect for manipulating the tiny gears and springs of mechanical timepieces. Swiss watches became legendary not just for their precision, but for their incredibly intricate internal mechanisms that no human craftsman could possibly assemble. In the ironworks of Birmingham, Tyrannosaur partnerships transformed metalworking. These massive predators, whose jaw pressure had evolved to crush the bones of giant prey, could generate the enormous forces needed for heavy forging. But here's what's really remarkable: they learned to modulate that pressure with incredible fineness. A tyrannosaur could apply exactly the right force to shape delicate decorative ironwork, or generate the massive pressure needed to forge ship anchors. American manufacturing took a completely different approach. In the steel mills of Pittsburgh, partnerships developed with Triceratops herds whose horned heads proved perfect for heavy construction work. These creatures could position massive steel beams with precision that cranes couldn't match, and their natural herd coordination allowed for construction projects of unprecedented scale and complexity. But perhaps the most transformative industrial partnership developed in the coal fields of West Virginia. Ankylosaur mining crews, using their armored heads and powerful digging claws, could extract coal from seams that were impossible for human miners to reach safely. More importantly, their natural ability to sense ground stability meant that mining accidents became virtually unknown. These dinosaur miners could feel through their feet whether tunnel supports were adequate, whether gas pockets were developing, whether cave-ins were imminent. The social implications of industrial dinosaur partnership were staggering. Traditional labor relations were turned upside down when workers included species that lived for centuries and thought in geological timescales. Dinosaur unions negotiated for working conditions and compensation packages that planned decades into the future. Human and dinosaur workers had to learn entirely new forms of cooperation and communication. The American Transcontinental Railroad, completed in 1869, showcases how this interspecies cooperation could achieve the impossible. Traditional history focuses on the heroic human workers who built the railroad through incredible hardships. What it doesn't tell you is how the project succeeded through unprecedented cooperation between human engineering and dinosaur capabilities. The Chinese work crews bringing the railroad east from California didn't just have human workers. They partnered with Asian Protoceratops, whose underground navigation abilities were legendary. These creatures could smell optimal routes through mountain ranges, detecting everything from rock stability to water sources to potential avalanche zones. Protoceratops route finding reduced construction time by years and prevented countless worker deaths from rock slides and cave-ins. On the western end, Irish work crews partnered with Pachyrhinosaurus herds, whose massive horned heads could shatter granite that would have taken human workers weeks to clear with explosives. These partnerships weren't just about brute force. Pachyrhinosaurus have sophisticated understanding of rock geology, and they could identify exactly where to strike to bring down cliff faces safely and efficiently. The famous Golden Spike ceremony on May 10th, 1869, featured the iconic photograph that's been hidden from public view for over a century. It shows not just the human work crews joining hands, but dinosaur and human workers together, claws and hands clasped in celebration of an achievement that neither species could have accomplished alone. But progress brought new challenges. The dinosaur labor movement of 1877 began when Triceratops dock workers in New York realized they were being paid far less than human workers, despite doing more dangerous and physically demanding work. The strike that followed brought global shipping to a complete halt. Picture the scene in New York Harbor, dozens of 3-ton herbivores forming picket lines that no human security force could break. These weren't violent protests, but the simple presence of organized Triceratops herds made it impossible for ships to load or unload cargo. The strike spread to other ports as dinosaur workers around the world coordinated their actions using communication networks that humans were just beginning to understand. The resolution came with the Equal Species Labor Act of 1878, which established the principle that compensation should be based on value contributed rather than species origin. This landmark legislation created the legal framework for interspecies employment that governs modern workplace relations. More importantly, it recognized dinosaur workers as full participants in the industrial economy, rather than merely intelligent tools. The scientific revolution that accompanied industrial partnership was equally dramatic. Marie Curie's research into radioactivity was accelerated by an accidental discovery. Certain dinosaur species could detect radiation levels through specialized cells in their scales. Stegosaurus working in Curie's laboratory would become agitated hours before her instruments could detect dangerous radiation exposure. This led to the development of the first biological radiation detection systems. Dinosaur partners became essential safety equipment in early nuclear research, their natural sensitivity preventing the kinds of radiation accidents that plagued nuclear development in our timeline. The partnership between human scientific innovation and dinosaur biological capabilities made nuclear research far safer and more precise than it would have been otherwise. Electrical development was similarly transformed. Thomas Edison's laboratory in Menlo Park employed a team of small Compsognathus, whose nervous systems were naturally sensitive to electrical fields. These tiny dinosaurs could detect electrical problems in circuits before they caused fires or equipment failures. Their contribution to electrical safety standards saved countless lives and prevented the electrical fires that plagued early urban electrification. The internal combustion engine might never have been perfected without dinosaur contributions to metallurgy. Certain species had evolved the ability to process and concentrate rare metals in their digestive systems. Partnerships with these creatures provided access to pure metal alloys that human smelting technology couldn't produce. The precise metal compositions that made reliable engines possible came from biological processes that had been refined over millions of years. But perhaps the most profound change was in human thinking itself. Working closely with creatures who thought in geological timescales forced humans to consider the long-term consequences of industrial development. Dinosaur partners, many of whom had lived through multiple climate cycles, provided perspectives on environmental change that humans couldn't possibly have developed on their own. The concept of sustainable development didn't emerge from human environmental consciousness. It came from dinosaur insistence that industrial growth had to be compatible with long-term ecological health. Creatures who had survived multiple extinction events understood better than anyone that short-term success meant nothing if it led to long-term environmental collapse. Factory designs began incorporating biological principles that dinosaur partners understood instinctively. Waste heat from manufacturing was channeled into greenhouse systems that grew food for herbivorous workers. Chemical byproducts were processed through biological systems that neutralized toxins. Production schedules were adjusted to match natural rhythms that optimized both dinosaur and human worker health. The transformation was so complete that by the 1880s, the distinction between biological and mechanical systems was becoming meaningless. Factories operated like living organisms, with human creativity and dinosaur capability integrated into seamless production systems that were more efficient, safer, and more environmentally sustainable than purely mechanical alternatives. Urban planning was revolutionized as cities adapted to accommodate workers who weighed several tons and communicated through ground vibrations. New York's subway system was designed around transportation needs of creatures who couldn't use conventional vehicles. London's sewer system incorporated biological waste processing that maintained ecosystem health for both human and dinosaur populations. The biomechanical revolution wasn't just about improving existing technology. It was about creating entirely new forms of technology that combined the best aspects of biological and mechanical systems. This integration would set the stage for the modern world, where the boundary between natural and artificial, between biological and technological, would disappear entirely. As the 19th century drew to a close, humans and dinosaurs weren't just working together. They were beginning to think together, dream together, and build a future that neither species could have imagined alone. The convergence was accelerating, and it was about to produce changes that would transform not just how civilization operated, but what civilization could become. Dawn breaks over Tokyo in our modern world, and what you're about to see would take your breath away. The city that emerges from the morning mist isn't the purely human metropolis you might expect. It's something entirely new in the history of urban development. It's a true interspecies city, designed from the ground up for residents who range from 6-inch Compsognathus to 60-foot Brachiosaurus. Let me introduce you to Akiko Tanaka, the city's first interspecies architecture director. As she steps out of her apartment building this morning, she's reviewing holographic plans that float above her tablet designs for the new vertical ecosystem, skyscrapers that represent the pinnacle of integrated urban planning. Picture these buildings with me. They're not just tall structures where different species happen to live. They're designed as complete ecosystems. Humans occupy the middle floors, with apartments and offices scaled to our needs. Flying dinosaurs nest in the upper levels, their eyries carved into the building's exterior with landing platforms that extend and retract based on wind conditions and air traffic patterns. Below ground, burrowing species maintain the building's infrastructure, water systems, waste processing, foundation maintenance in tunnel networks that connect to the city-wide underground transportation system. Akiko's morning commute showcases how completely transportation has been reimagined. She walks to the nearest Pteranodon Express platform, where massive flying reptiles arrive in perfectly choreographed sequences. Each Pteranodon carries a passenger pod designed for maximum comfort and safety during flight. The pilots, both dinosaur and human working in partnership, navigate using three-dimensional traffic control systems that manage movement at dozens of different altitudes simultaneously. As Akiko's pod rises above the city, you can see the incredible complexity of modern Tokyo. Traffic lights exist at multiple heights, managing not just ground-level vehicle flow but aerial traffic lanes for creatures of different flight capabilities. Walkways separate by weight load, gossamer bridges for small dinosaurs and children, reinforced causeways for massive herbivores, underground passages for species that prefer enclosed spaces. But the crown jewel of this integrated urban planning is visible from the air. The famous Shibuya crossing has been transformed into something that draws tourists from around the world. Every morning at precisely 8:30, the choreographed crossing begins. 50 different species cross the intersection simultaneously, in a dance of movement that seems chaotic but follows mathematical patterns worked out by Troodon traffic coordinators. Watch carefully as the light changes. First, the flying species pass overhead in formation, then ground traffic begins. Humans and small dinosaurs weaving between the legs of massive sauropods, whose steps are timed to the second. Pachycephalosaurus use their domed heads to gently guide traffic flow. Ankylosaurus serve as mobile traffic islands, their armored backs providing safe waiting areas for smaller pedestrians caught between light changes. The entire crossing takes exactly 3 minutes and 47 seconds, and in all the years it's been operating, there's never been a single collision or injury. It's become a symbol of what's possible when different forms of intelligence work together to solve complex coordination problems. But Tokyo is just one example of how the modern world has been transformed. Let me take you to the Amazon rainforest, where Dr. Carlos Mendoza leads the Rainforest Restoration Corps, the most successful environmental recovery program in human history. Carlos's morning begins before dawn as he reviews the overnight reports from his team. But his team isn't just human. It's a carefully balanced mix of species whose combined capabilities are reversing deforestation at a rate that seemed impossible just decades ago. The Brachiosaurus crews can replant 100-foot trees in locations where no human machinery could operate. Their height allows them to position mature trees exactly where the forest canopy needs them, while their gentle touch ensures that root systems aren't damaged during transplantation. A single Brachiosaurus can accomplish in one day what human forestry teams would need months to achieve. Pachycephalosaurus serve as soil engineers, using their domed heads to compress earth with precisely the right pressure to create optimal growing conditions for different plant species. They've learned to read soil composition through their feet, adjusting their compaction technique based on mineral content, moisture levels, and the needs of specific tree species. But perhaps most remarkably, the herbivorous dinosaurs serve as living seed banks. Their digestive systems have evolved over millions of years to process plant matter in ways that actually enhance seed viability. Plants that pass through dinosaur digestive systems often show improved germination rates and resistance to disease. Carlos's journal entries from this morning contain an entry that still gives me chills when I read it. Yesterday, his team made a discovery that's being called the botanical find of the century. A diplodocus named Ancient One, who's been working with the restoration project for over a decade, provided a sample of her digestive contents that contained seeds from a plant species that was thought to have been extinct for over 2 centuries. Think about the implications of this. Ancient One, who is herself over 300 years old, had been carrying these seeds in her digestive system for generations, keeping an entire species alive without anyone realizing it. The plant, a variety of Brazil nut tree with unique medicinal properties, is now being propagated using seeds that dinosaurs preserved through their own bodies. This discovery has revolutionized our understanding of conservation. Dinosaurs aren't just helping us restore damaged ecosystems, they've been maintaining genetic diversity that we didn't even know existed. Their long lifespans and complex digestive systems make them living repositories of biological heritage that spans centuries. But the most profound transformation in our modern world might be best illustrated through the eyes of 8-year-old Maya Okonkwo in Lagos, Nigeria. Today is Bring Your Dinosaur to School Day at her elementary school, and Maya is practically vibrating with excitement as she waits for her best friend to arrive. Her best friend is a young Troodon named Clix, and their relationship represents something entirely new in the history of interspecies interaction. Maya and Clix have been partners since they were both toddlers, growing up together in a way that's becoming common for their generation, but would have been unimaginable to their grandparents. Watch them work together on Maya's math homework. The problem involves complex 3-dimensional geometry that's challenging for an 8-year-old human brain. But Clix, whose species evolved 3-dimensional thinking for aerial navigation and pack hunting, can visualize the solution instantly. Using a combination of gentle touches, rapid clicking sounds, and the colored patterns that troodons can create on their skin, Clix guides Maya through the problem-solving process. This isn't Clix simply giving Maya the answers, it's a form of collaborative thinking that's creating new forms of intelligence neither species could achieve alone. Maya's intuitive understanding of symbolic representation, combined with Clix's spatial reasoning abilities, produces solutions that are more elegant and creative than either of them could develop independently. Their teacher, Dr. Sarah Okafor, has been documenting these interspecies learning partnerships for her doctoral research. What she's discovering is that children who grow up with dinosaur partners develop cognitive abilities that are genuinely different from those of previous human generations. They think more three-dimensionally, plan in longer timescales, and show enhanced pattern recognition that seems to combine human and dinosaur cognitive strengths. Maya's generation is the first to see interspecies relationships as completely natural. When she plays with Clix, she doesn't think about the fact that her best friend is a member of a species that's been around for over 100 million years. She doesn't marvel at the evolutionary adaptations that allow Clix to change color or communicate through vibrations. For Maya, these are just normal parts of how her friend expresses himself. This natural acceptance is creating social changes that are just beginning to be understood. Maya's class includes children whose partners represent dozens of different species, each bringing their own unique capabilities and perspectives to group projects and learning activities. Art classes incorporate color-changing displays from troodon students. Music classes include the complex harmonic vocalizations of young Parasaurolophus. Physical education adapts to the incredible range of body types and movement capabilities represented in a typical classroom. The educational implications are staggering. When you have Ankylosaurus students whose armored bodies make them virtually indestructible, safety protocols become very different. When you have Compsognathus students whose small size allows them to access spaces that no one else can reach, building design has to accommodate multiple scales simultaneously. When you have flying students who can observe classroom activities from above, the entire concept of perspective becomes three-dimensional. But Maya's story illustrates something even more profound. After school, she and Clix walk home through Lagos's integrated neighborhoods, where apartment buildings accommodate residents ranging from tiny Compsognathus families to massive Diplodocus individuals. Street vendors sell food that appeals to both human and dinosaur tastes. Public transportation includes everything from human-scale buses to Brachiosaurus-carried platforms that can transport dozens of passengers at eye level with the treetops. Maya waves to Mr. Adebayo, the elderly Stegosaurus who runs the corner newsstand. His armored plates change color in greeting, a warm orange that Maya has learned means, "Good afternoon, young friend." Clix responds with his own color display, a rapid pattern of blues and greens that translates roughly to, "Thank you for the mathematical puzzle you gave us yesterday." This casual interspecies communication has become so natural for Maya's generation. They're developing forms of expression that incorporate multiple sensory modalities simultaneously. Maya might speak to a human friend while creating hand gestures for a deaf classmate and shifting her posture to send tactile signals to her troodon partner. This multimodal communication is creating richer, more nuanced forms of social interaction than any single species ever developed. The economic implications of this integration are equally remarkable. Maya's mother works for a consulting firm that specializes in interspecies project management. Her clients include construction companies that employ ankylosaur engineers, agriculture firms that partner with herbivorous dinosaurs, and research institutions that collaborate with the long-term memory capabilities of elderly sauropods. Maya's father is a translator who specializes in carnivorous dinosaur dialects. Different raptor species have developed distinct communication patterns, and accurate translation requires understanding not just their vocalizations, but their chemical signals, body language, and even the magnetic field fluctuations they use for navigation. Their household, like millions of others around the world, operates according to rhythms that accommodate both human and dinosaur needs. Clicks requires several hours of hunting practice each day, not because he needs to catch food, but because the physical and mental challenges are essential for Troodon's psychological health. Maya's family has learned to structure their evening routines around these practice sessions, and Maya herself has become quite skilled at designing puzzle challenges that keep Clicks mentally stimulated. The technology in Maya's home reflects this integration. Smart home systems respond to voice commands in multiple languages, color pattern communications from dinosaur residents, and even ground vibration signals from larger species. Climate control systems maintain different temperature zones for residents with varying thermal needs. Food preparation systems can handle everything from human-scale meals to the massive quantities required by herbivorous dinosaur houseguests. But what's most remarkable about Maya's world is how completely normal it seems to her. She can't imagine a world where humans lived separately from dinosaurs, where intelligence was limited to a single species, where the incredible diversity of perspectives and capabilities that surround her daily life simply didn't exist. When Maya does her homework, she's learning not just human history, but the shared history of both species. When she thinks about her future career, she's considering possibilities that wouldn't have existed in any previous generation. When she looks up at the night sky, she's seeing not just stars but destinations that interspecies cooperation might one day reach. Maya Okonkwo represents something unprecedented in the history of life on Earth, a generation that has grown up truly integrated with other forms of intelligence. Her consciousness is shaped by daily interaction with minds that think in ways fundamentally different from human thought, and that integration is creating new possibilities for what consciousness itself might become. As Maya and Clicks finish their homework and prepare for dinner, they're participating in the ordinary daily life of a world that has moved beyond the limitations of single-species thinking. They're living proof that the future belongs not to humans or dinosaurs separately, but to the incredible things that become possible when different forms of intelligence learn to work together as partners in consciousness itself. The countdown echoes across Cape Canaveral on July 20th, 2029, exactly 60 years after Apollo 11 first carried humans to the Moon. But this launch is different from anything in space exploration history. This mission isn't just taking humans beyond Earth's atmosphere, it's taking Earth itself to another world through the most ambitious interspecies collaboration ever attempted. T-minus 30 seconds, and counting. Commander Sarah Chen's voice carries the calm professionalism that made her the perfect choice to lead humanity's and Dinosauria's first interplanetary colony mission. But she's not alone on the bridge of the Starship Time's evolutionary leap asterisk. Her crew represents the culmination of millions of years of separate evolution learning to work as one. To her left, Navigator Kika, a velociraptor whose ancestors had been using stellar navigation for migration routes long before humans discovered agriculture, makes the final calculations for their trajectory to Mars. Kika's species had evolved an intuitive understanding of three-dimensional space that made her the most precise navigator in the solar system. Her clawed hands dance across holographic star charts that would take human navigators hours to interpret, but which she reads as naturally as ancient raptors once read animal tracks. Behind them, pilot Windwright, a pteranodon whose three-dimensional thinking had been refined by millions of years of atmospheric flight monitors, the ship's atmospheric systems. Where human pilots think in terms of up, down, forward, and back, Windwright's consciousness naturally operates in true three-dimensional space. She can feel air currents and pressure changes through sensory organs that humans don't possess, making her capable of spacecraft maneuvering that no human pilot could match. But perhaps most remarkably, curled in a specially designed acceleration couch, is Engineer Tiny, a modified Compsognathus, whose small size and incredible problem-solving abilities make her perfect for the extravehicular repairs that space missions inevitably require. At 18 inches tall and weighing less than 5 pounds, Tiny can access spacecraft systems that would be impossible for human astronauts to reach. Her tiny claws can manipulate components with a precision that makes her the most valuable maintenance specialist in the space program. T-10 seconds. The massive chemical rockets ignite, but they're supplemented by something unprecedented in space exploration. Biological thrust systems developed through partnership with deep-sea dinosaurs, whose natural buoyancy control had inspired breakthrough propulsion. Technology. The ship rises not just on the power of human engineering, but on principles learned from creatures who had been mastering three-dimensional movement for hundreds of millions of years. As the Time's evolutionary leap times breaks free of Earth's atmosphere, the crew settles into routines that would seem impossible to earlier generations of space explorers. During the 6-month journey to Mars, they'll be sustained not just by technological life support systems, but by biological partnerships that make long-duration spaceflight not just possible, but sustainable. The ship's ecosystem includes specially adapted Compsognathus, whose rapid metabolisms can process waste products into useful nutrients. Small sauropods provide natural carbon dioxide scrubbing through their specialized respiratory systems. Most remarkably, the crew includes several Troodon whose time perception makes them ideal for monitoring systems that require attention on timescales that would exhaust human operators. But it's during the quiet moments of the journey that the most profound discoveries emerge. Dr. Kenji Nakamura, the mission's dinosaur neuroscientist, has been conducting research that's revolutionizing our understanding of consciousness itself. His studies reveal that different dinosaur species experience time in fundamentally different ways that challenge every assumption humans have made about the nature of temporal perception. Picture Dr. Nakamura in the ship's laboratory, monitoring the neural activity of Patience, an elderly ankylosaurus whose brain activity reveals something extraordinary. What seems like minutes to the human crew feels like hours to Patience. Her consciousness operates on timescales that allow her to perceive changes and patterns that faster-thinking species miss entirely. This discovery explains the extraordinary patience that dinosaurs had shown throughout their partnership with humanity. They weren't just tolerating the rapid pace of human thinking, they were experiencing time in a way that allowed them to see long-term patterns and consequences that human consciousness couldn't detect. The implications are staggering. When dinosaur partners had insisted on environmental protection and sustainable development, they weren't just being cautious, they were seeing the future consequences of human actions with a clarity that human temporal perception couldn't achieve. Their resistance to short-term thinking wasn't stubbornness, it was wisdom based on a fundamentally different experience of time. Dr. Nakamura's research is revealing that this temporal perception difference is what made dinosaur-human partnerships so powerful. Human creativity and rapid innovation, combined with dinosaur long-term perspective and pattern recognition, created a form of collective intelligence that neither species could achieve alone. As the Time's evolutionary leap times approaches Mars, these insights prove essential for mission success. The planet they're approaching isn't just another world to be conquered by human technology. It's an environment that requires the kind of long-term thinking that only interspecies consciousness can provide. Dinosaur crew members, with their instinctive understanding of closed-loop ecosystems, recognize immediately that Mars isn't a dead world to be terraformed through brute force engineering. It's a dormant ecosystem waiting to be awakened through the same principles that had allowed dinosaurs to survive multiple extinction events on Earth. Windwright's aerial reconnaissance reveals subsurface water patterns that human instruments had missed. Her flight-evolved ability to read air pressure and atmospheric dynamics allows her to identify locations where underground water sources are closest to the surface. Kika's navigational instincts, evolved for finding resources across vast distances, detect mineral concentrations that will be essential for establishing sustainable life support systems. But it's Tiny who makes the most crucial discovery. During her first EVA repair mission, her small size allows her to explore Martian cave systems that would be inaccessible to human astronauts. Deep in these caves, she discovers something that changes everything. Microscopic life forms that have been dormant for millions of years, waiting for the right conditions to reactivate. The discovery transforms the mission from colonization to collaboration. The Martian microorganisms, awakened by the presence of Earth-based life forms, begin forming symbiotic relationships with the ship's biological systems. Within weeks, the evolutionary leap times isn't just supporting Earth life on Mars, it's creating the first truly interplanetary ecosystem. The success of the Mars mission leads to revelations about dinosaur intelligence that fundamentally change human understanding of consciousness itself. Back on Earth, researchers studying the mission data realized that certain dinosaur species had been preparing for space exploration for millions of years without anyone realizing it. The deep-diving mosasaurs that had developed pressure resistance for ocean depths turned out to be naturally adapted for the vacuum of space. Their bioluminescent communication systems work perfectly in the electromagnetic environment of interplanetary space. Most remarkably, their ability to survive in low-oxygen environments makes them ideal for asteroid mining operations. Pteranodon flight capabilities, refined over millions of years of atmospheric navigation, prove superior to human-designed spacecraft maneuvering systems. Their three-dimensional thinking allows them to plot trajectories through asteroid fields and gravitational fields with an intuitive understanding that surpasses computer calculations. But perhaps most important, the mission reveals that dinosaur consciousness includes something that human thinking had been missing: genuine comprehension of astronomical timescales. Where humans think in decades and centuries, dinosaurs naturally think in geological epochs. Their perspective makes them ideal partners for space exploration projects that will unfold over thousands of years. The establishment of the first permanent interspecies Mars colony in 2031 marks the beginning of humanity's transformation from a single planet to a truly cosmic civilization. But the colony succeeds not through human technological dominance, but through the integration of biological wisdom that had been developing for hundreds of millions of years. The Martian colonists develop forms of agriculture that combine human plant breeding with dinosaur understanding of soil ecology. Their architecture incorporates the burrow-building expertise of ankylosaurs, adapted for Martian geology. Their transportation systems use principles learned from pteranodon flight, adapted for the different atmospheric conditions of Mars. Most remarkably, the colonists develop new forms of communication that work across interplanetary distances. Using the seismic communication techniques that dinosaurs had perfected on Earth, they learned to send messages through planetary geology itself, creating communication networks that span the solar system. But the real transformation happens to human consciousness itself. Living and working alongside dinosaur partners in the extreme environment of Mars forces humans to adopt longer-term thinking patterns. Colonists begin to experience time more like their dinosaur partners, developing patience and perspective that previous human generations couldn't achieve. The children born on Mars, the first truly interplanetary generation, represent something unprecedented in the history of consciousness. Raised from birth in integrated communities where human and dinosaur thinking patterns merge, they develop cognitive abilities that seem almost supernatural to their Earth-bound relatives. These Mars-born children can plan projects that will take centuries to complete. They think naturally in 3 dimensions, making them intuitive space navigators. Most remarkably, they develop forms of empathy that allow them to understand and communicate with species whose consciousness operates on completely different temporal and spatial scales. By 2040, the success of the Mars colony has inspired missions to the asteroid belt, where dinosaur partners prove essential for zero-gravity mining operations. Compsognathus crews, working in teams with human engineers, can disassemble asteroids with precision that preserves valuable materials while avoiding the debris problems that had plagued earlier robotic mining attempts. The Jupiter system becomes accessible when researchers discover that certain dinosaur species can survive the high radiation environment around the gas giant. Their natural radiation resistance, evolved during the solar storm periods of Earth's past, allows them to work in environments that would be lethal to unprotected humans. But it's the mission to Europa that produces the most profound discovery in human history. The ice-covered moon of Jupiter, long suspected of harboring life in its subterranean oceans, turns out to be inhabited by descendants of Earth's own mosasaurs, ancient marine reptiles that had somehow made the journey across space millions of years ago during a period of massive solar activity. The discovery that dinosaurs had been spacefaring long before humans even existed reframes everything about Earth's history and humanity's place in the cosmos. These ancient space travelers hadn't just survived in the harsh environment of Europa, they had thrived, developing technologies and consciousness that surpassed anything achieved on Earth. The reunion between Earth's dinosaurs and their European cousins creates the first truly interstellar communication network. Using techniques developed over millions of years of separation, the two populations begin sharing knowledge that accelerates technological and consciousness development beyond anything previously imagined. 9-year-old Zara stands at the Kenya Space Center on a clear evening in 2045, watching the first cargo ships return from Europa carrying the most precious cargo imaginable, dinosaur eggs from the Europa colonies, ready to hatch on the world where their species first evolved. Her grandmother, one of the last humans to remember the time before interspecies partnership, whispers to Zara about how humans once thought they were alone in the universe, the only intelligent species on a single planet. Zara listens politely, but she can't really comprehend such loneliness. Her world is filled with consciousness in forms that span from the tiniest Compsognathus to the vast, slow thoughts of ancient Brontosaurus, from the quick aerial intelligence of Pteranodon to the deep, patient wisdom of creatures who think in geological time. As shooting stars streak overhead, not harbingers of extinction, but cargo ships, bringing resources from asteroid mining operations run by dinosaur-human partnerships, Zara understands something that no previous generation could have grasped. Intelligence isn't singular but symphony. Consciousness isn't human but universal. Survival isn't about dominance, but about dance. The eternal dance between all of Earth's children continues now across multiple worlds, whether they dream under scales or skin, whether their thoughts unfold in seconds or centuries, whether they navigate by magnetic fields or star positions. The asteroid that grazed Earth 66 million years ago didn't end the age of dinosaurs, it began the age of integration that would eventually carry consciousness itself beyond the boundaries of any single world. Standing there under the vast cosmos, watching ships return from Europa with the future in their cargo holds, Zara witnesses the culmination of the greatest evolutionary experiment in the history of life. The transformation of consciousness from planetary to cosmic, from single species to truly universal. The giants never left Earth, they helped carry it to the stars.